In Maple Ridge, where everyone knows your name and your business, Shadow waited. The German shepherd with intelligent eyes had been labeled defective by professional trainers, too quiet, too hesitant, lacking the bold temperament of a working dog. For 3 years, he drifted from shelter to shelter, always passed over, until Fire Chief Miller took a chance no one else would. Something in the dog's watchful gaze spoke of untapped potential. Now as dawn breaks over Main Street, the air carries an invisible threat. A hairline fracture in the town's century-old gas line, slowly filling basements with deadly fumes. When experienced crews stand baffled, could this rejected canine truly be their only hope? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The training facility prided itself on producing only the finest working dogs. Shadow's lineage promised greatness. His parents were award-winning canines with impeccable records, but from 8 weeks old, trainers noticed his unusual quietness. "Doesn't bark on command," read the first note clipped to his kennel. By 6 months, frustration mounted. Shadow understood every command, but remained stubbornly silent when others would vocalize. "Unsuitable for service," declared the head trainer, stamping his evaluation in red. Shadow watched as his littermates graduated to police academies and search and rescue teams. He alone remained, eyes following the handlers who increasingly avoided his gaze. Then came the transfers, first to the police academy, then returned. To the border patrol, then returned. Each rejection reinforced the whispers, "That's the one that can't be trained." The training facility prided itself on producing only the finest working dogs. Shadow's lineage promised greatness. His parents were award-winning canines with impeccable records. But from 8 weeks old, trainers noticed his unusual quietness. "Doesn't bark on command," read the first note clipped to his kennel. By 6 months, frustration mounted. Shadow understood every command, but remained stubbornly silent when others would vocalize. "Unsuitable for service," declared the head trainer, stamping his evaluation in red. Shadow watched as his littermates graduated to police academies and search and rescue teams. He alone remained, eyes following the handlers who increasingly avoided his gaze. Then came the transfers, first to the police academy, then returned. To the border patrol, then returned. Each rejection reinforced the whispers, "That's the one that can't be trained." The clipboard hanging outside Shadow's kennel grew thick with failed assessment sheets. The young trainer, Davis, had been Shadow's last advocate. "He's smart, maybe the smartest in the litter," Davis had argued during the final evaluation. "Just because he doesn't bark doesn't mean he can't work. A dog that won't bark on command is useless in the field," the program director countered. "What good is a K9 that can't alert? We've given him 3 extra months. It's time to cut our losses." The argument ended there. Shadow watched as Davis packed his few possessions, a worn tennis ball, a special brush, the blue collar that was supposed to have been his service marker. Instead, they fitted him with the standard shelter collar, orange and institutional. "I'm sorry, boy," Davis had whispered, slipping him a final treat. "Someone will see what I see in you." No one did. The county shelter kept Shadow for 4 months before transferring him to a rescue organization specializing in German shepherds. 3 families had attempted adoption, each returning him within weeks. "Too intense," said the first family. "Spooks the children by staring," said the second. "Doesn't feel like a pet," said the third. Shadow learned to recognize the look, the disappointment, the perplexed frustration of humans who wanted something he couldn't give them. The noise, the enthusiastic greeting, the playful barking that seemed to come so naturally to other dogs. Instead, Shadow watched. He learned the patterns of the shelter, which workers would sneak him extra food, which ones found his silence unnerving. He memorized the routines, the sounds that preceded feeding time, the subtle shift in lighting that meant the day was ending. By his 3rd year, He had moved through 7 different placements. His file grew thicker, each transfer adding new notes, new observations, new theories about why this seemingly perfect specimen had proved so thoroughly disappointing. Possible neurological issues, suggested one evaluator. Fear-based response. Inhibition, theorized another. Just plain stubborn, concluded a third. No one considered that Shadow might simply be listening. The last shelter was the smallest, a rural operation with limited space and resources. Shadow's kennel was at the end of the row, partially obscured by storage boxes. Potential adopters rarely made it that far down the line, distracted by the younger, more demonstrative dogs who pressed against the front of their enclosures, barking and wagging. Shadow sat back, watching through the chain link as family after family walked past. He no longer approached the front when humans paused nearby. Experience had taught him the pattern: initial interest, then confusion at his stillness, finally dismissal. The training evaluation report followed him, transferred from shelter to shelter, a permanent indictment. Unsuitable for service. Shadow had learned to accept this verdict. He settled into the routine of institutional life, the mechanical predictability of meals, walks, and night checks. If he couldn't be what they wanted, he would be what he was, a silent observer, cataloging details that no one realized he noticed. He was 3 years and 4 months old when the man with the grey moustache and fire department jacket stopped at his kennel, studied the evaluation report, and did something unexpected. He laughed. Robert Miller had been fire chief of Maple Ridge for 26 years. He'd joined the department fresh out of high school and worked his way up, outlasting 3 mayors and countless town council members. At 58, with retirement looming, he developed a reputation for being methodical, traditional, and stubbornly practical, which made his fixation on acquiring a fire safety dog all the more perplexing too. The town council. Let me get this straight, Mayor Patterson said, peering over reading glasses at the department budget ledger open before him. You want to allocate funds for a dog when we can barely afford to replace the ladder truck? The council chamber, wood-panelled and smelling faintly of furniture polish, held the 7 council members and a sparse audience of local reporters and concerned citizens. Miller stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, the perfect picture of a public servant, except for the uncharacteristic spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. It's a modest investment, Miller replied. Neighboring counties have implemented canine programs with significant success. These dogs assist with fire prevention education, accelerant detection, and search and rescue. Councilwoman Diaz tapped her pen against the table. And the cost? Training and equipment, approximately $12,000 for a fully trained dog. But I've researched alternatives. There are rescue organizations that we simply don't have the budget, Patterson interrupted. Not this fiscal year. Miller had anticipated this. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and distributed photocopies to each council member. I've outlined a phased approach. If we can allocate just $500 now, I can acquire a pre-trained dog through rescue channels. The equipment can be funded through community donations. The council exchanged glances. Miller wasn't known for pet projects or frivolous requests. His pragmatism had saved the town money countless times over the years. Fine, Patterson conceded after a lengthy silence. $500. But this dog better be exceptional, Bob. I'm not explaining to taxpayers why we're feeding a mascot when the station roof still leaks. The following Saturday found Miller visiting his 4th shelter of the day. His request had been met with consistent skepticism. A trained fire dog for $500 was unrealistic. Proper canines cost thousands, not hundreds. At Golden Pines Animal Shelter, the manager, a tired-looking woman named Evelyn, barely concealed her amusement. A service dog for $500. Chief Miller, even our standard adoption fee is $200, and that's for pets, not working dogs. Miller rubbed his moustache, a habit from 30 years of firefighting that had survived his transition to administrative work. There must be something. A washout from a training program, perhaps. I'm not looking for perfection. Evelyn hesitated, then closed her logbook. Well, there is one. But he's been returned so many times we've stopped listing him for adoption. Keeps getting sent back. What's wrong with him? Miller asked, interest piqued. Nothing obvious. Beautiful German Shepherd, good health, no aggression. He's just odd. Doesn't bark, ever. Handlers can't get him to alert properly. Miller smiled. Could I meet him? Evelyn led him past rows of kennels to the very last enclosure, partially hidden behind storage boxes. Unlike the other dogs who, pressed against the fencing, barking for attention, this one sat back, watching with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate Miller as thoroughly as Miller was evaluating him. This is Shadow, Evelyn said, reaching for the clipboard hanging beside the kennel. 3 years old, failed out of canine training school, bounced between shelters and rescues. His file says he understands commands but won't vocalize on cue. Miller took the clipboard, scanning the extensive notes and the bold red stamp, unsuitable for service. Then he did something that surprised both Evelyn and the dog. He laughed. What's funny? Evelyn asked. They've been trying to fix him, Miller said, when maybe what makes him different is exactly what makes him valuable. Shadow tilted his head slightly, ears forward. I'll take him, Miller said, handing back the clipboard. Evelyn stared. Just like that? Don't you want to test him first? Miller was already reaching for his wallet, counting out 5 crisp $100 bills, his entire allocation. Sometimes you just know. The Maple Ridge Fire Department occupied a red brick building that had served the town since 1962. It housed 2 engines, 1 ladder truck of questionable reliability, and 12 full-time firefighters working rotating shifts. The station's worn linoleum floors had witnessed countless drills, emergencies, and the occasional birthday celebration. Now they felt the careful steps of Shadow, who moved through his new home with methodical precision. This is the new safety. Your dog? Lieutenant Jenny Ramirez asked, arms crossed, as she watched Shadow inspect the common area. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her expression skeptical. Doesn't seem very enthusiastic. Miller, who was filling out Shadow's department paperwork, looked up with a patient smile. Give him time. He's assessing his environment. Dogs don't assess, Chief. They sniff and bark and jump around. This one moves like he's defusing a bomb. Miller watched as Shadow made a deliberate circuit of the room, pausing briefly at each doorway, each piece of equipment, each firefighter. Different doesn't mean deficient, Jenny. Shadow completed his inspection and returned to Miller's side, sitting perfectly still beside his chair. No tail wagging, no nudging for attention, just quiet presence. Well, he's your project, Ramirez said with a shrug. Just keep him out of the way during calls. After shift change, the station quieted. Miller unfolded a padded mat in the corner of his office, an improvised bed until proper equipment could be ordered. This is home now, he told Shadow, who studied the sleeping arrangement with careful attention. It's not much, but it's yours. To Miller's surprise, Shadow didn't settle on the mat. Instead, the dog made another circuit of the station, this time more thorough. He examined the engines, the equipment racks, the turnout gear hanging ready for emergency calls. He paused at the alarm system, head tilted, as if memorizing its location. Miller followed, curious. What are you doing, boy? He asked softly. Shadow continued his patrol, moving from room to room with purpose. When he finished, he returned to Miller's office and finally settled on the mat, eyes still alert. You're a strange one, Miller murmured, but there was affection in his voice. Over the next week, Shadow's behavior established a pattern. During busy periods, he remained unobtrusive, watching from corners as firefighters drilled and responded to calls. At night, he conducted silent inspections of the entire facility before settling down. That dog is weird, probationary firefighter Keller declared after catching Shadow staring at the sprinkler system. It's like he's casing the joint. Maybe he is. Ramirez replied dryly. Maybe he's an undercover ATF agent in a dog suit. The younger firefighters made a game of trying to get Shadow to bark. They jangled keys, bounced tennis balls, and even played recordings of other dogs. Shadow observed these efforts with patient tolerance, but remained silent. Miller didn't participate in these games. Instead, he worked with Shadow after hours, discovering something remarkable. While Shadow wouldn't bark on command, his attention to detail was extraordinary. He could find a dropped tool in seconds. He anticipated needs, bringing gloves before hands were empty, moving to doors moments before someone needed to pass through. He's not defective, Miller told Ramirez, after Shadow alerted him to a missing oxygen regulator by simply standing beside its empty storage spot. He just communicates differently. Still think a proper canine would be more useful, Ramirez replied, but there was less conviction in her voice as she watched Shadow guide a rookie to the misplaced equipment with his silent presence. Gradually, Shadow's reliability earned him space. Firefighters began leaving their room doors open at night, accepting his quiet inspections. Some even reported sleeping better, knowing he had checked the area. Miller observed this integration with quiet satisfaction. One evening, updating the log, he noticed Shadow sitting beside the communication desk, watching the dispatch radio with focused attention. "What do you hear that we don't?" Miller wondered aloud. Shadow's ears twitched slightly, but he remained fixed on the radio, listening for something beyond human perception. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. Maple Ridge had once been the manufacturing heart of the county. Founded in 1889 around a furniture factory, the town had expanded through the early 20th century, adding textile mills, a glass works, and a modest steel fabrication plant. The post-war boom had been kind to Maple Ridge, filling its coffers and expanding its borders until nearly 10,000 residents called it home. Then came the 1980s. One by one, the factories closed. The population dwindled as families sought work elsewhere. Those who remained watched their once thriving downtown fade, historic buildings emptying as businesses failed. By 2025, Maple Ridge had stabilized at around 8,700 residents. The downtown had reinvented itself with boutique shops, a community theater converted from the old cinema, and restaurants catering to weekend tourists drawn by the town's quaint charm and the nearby lake. What visitors didn't see, what even most residents forgot, was what lay beneath the brick-paved Main Street and the Victorian-era buildings. A complex network of pipes, conduits, and tunnels installed piecemeal over 130 years. Water lines from the 1920s ran alongside gas pipes from the 1950s, electrical conduits from various decades, and the remnants of coal delivery chutes sealed off but never removed. Mayor Thomas Patterson stood in the town square, admiring the newly installed directory kiosk with its hand-drawn map of the historic district. The cartographer had captured Maple Ridge's charm, with artful illustrations of landmarks, the library with its copper dome, the clock tower on the former bank building, the row of painted ladies along Elm Street. "It's perfect," Patterson told the assembled small crowd of council members and local reporters. "This map will help visitors appreciate the rich history of our downtown." What the map didn't show was the aging infrastructure beneath their feet, the maze of utilities that town engineer Walter Thompson had been warning about for years. "Beautiful work," Thompson commented, studying the ornate borders and decorative compass rows. Only his furrowed brow betrayed his concern. "Though I notice you've highlighted the historic district's gas lamp features prominently." Patterson beamed. "Yes, we've earmarked funds to restore 6 of the original gas lamps along Main Street. Tourists love that authentic historic touch." "Using the original gas lines?" Thompson asked quietly. The mayor's smile faltered momentarily. "Walter, we've been through this. The restoration budget covers the visible elements. The comprehensive infrastructure overhaul will have to wait until next fiscal year." He lowered his voice. Or the one after that? At the edge of the small gathering, Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy listened with professional interest. As Maple Ridge's head librarian for 27 years, she considered herself the unofficial keeper of the town's history. Her domain, the Carnegie-funded library with its reading rooms and basement archives, housed the most complete records of Maple Ridge's development, including the original infrastructure plans that even Town Hall had lost in a basement flood. In the 1970s. "Eleanor, what do you think?" Patterson called, grateful for a change of subject. "It's lovely, Thomas," she replied, adjusting her tortoise-shell glasses. "Though I would point out that the gas lamps were actually installed in 1906, not 1902 as your plaque states." Thompson smiled slightly at the correction. Eleanor's precision was legendary. "Speaking of historical accuracy," she continued, "I've been meaning to ask about the strange smell in the library basement. Rather like rotten eggs, but inconsistent. The maintenance crew suggests it's the old books, but I've worked with old books for decades, and this is different." Thompson's smile vanished. "Rotten eggs? How long has this been happening?" "Off and on for about 2 weeks. More noticeable in the mornings." "I'll stop by tomorrow," Thompson promised, his casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. As the gathering dispersed, Fire Chief Miller approached with Shadow at his heel. The dog moved with characteristic deliberation, studying the town square with attentive eyes. "Nice map," Miller commented to Thompson, who had lingered behind. "Shame it doesn't show what's underneath." Thompson sighed. Budget constraints. Always budget constraints. Shadow's attention had fixed on the decorative grate near the base of the kiosk, an original ventilation point for the tunnels below. He moved closer, nose working, then looked up at Miller with unusual intensity. "What is it, boy?" Miller asked. Shadow returned his gaze to the grate, perfectly still, except for his nose twitching at the almost imperceptible current of air rising from below. "Probably smells a squirrel," Thompson said with a weak laugh. "Or maybe he appreciates historic infrastructure more than our mayor does." Miller wasn't so sure. In the month since Shadow had joined the department, he'd learned to trust the dog's focused attention. "Maybe we should check the maintenance tunnels." "When was the last inspection?" Thompson's laugh faded. "Full inspection? 2018. We do spot checks when specific issues arise, but maybe it's time for another look," Miller suggested. Shadow remained fixated on the grate, as still as the bronze statue of the town founder across the square, but far more alert to dangers the humans around him couldn't yet perceive. Mrs. Abernathy prided herself on maintaining the Maple Ridge Library, with the same meticulous attention to detail she applied to cataloging rare books, which made the persistent odor in the basement archives all the more frustrating. "I've submitted 3 maintenance requests," she told Chief Miller as she led him and Shadow down the narrow stairs. "Each time, they send young Mr. Perkins, who sniffs once and declares it's just old building smell." Miller followed her through the stacks of archival materials, bound newspapers dating back to 1892, town records in acid-free boxes, historical photographs in climate-controlled cabinets. Shadow moved ahead of them both, his nose working constantly. "It's strongest in the northeast corner," Mrs. Abernathy explained, pointing toward a section containing architectural drawings. "By the old coal chute." Miller had arranged this visit following a scheduled fire safety demonstration at the library. Such presentations had become more engaging since Shadow joined the department. Children were drawn to the quiet dog who would demonstrate stop, drop, and roll on command, though never with a sound. "When did you first notice it?" Miller asked, watching as Shadow methodically worked his way around the perimeter of the room. "About 3 weeks ago, intermittent at first, then more consistent." Miller approached the corner she'd indicated, inhaling deeply. There was something faint but distinct, a slight sulphurous odor. "Natural gas has an added odorant. Mercaptan," Miller explained, "makes leaks detectable. But underground, soil, Bacteria can sometimes remove the smell. Mrs. Abernathy adjusted her glasses. Are you suggesting we have a gas leak, Chief Miller? Before he could answer, Shadow did something unusual. He stopped at the northeast corner, pawed once at the floor, then sat facing the wall perfectly still. His posture was rigid, his attention unwavering. Shadow? Miller called. The dog didn't move. What's he doing? Mrs. Abernathy asked. I'm not sure, Miller admitted. This is new behavior. Miller approached, kneeling beside Shadow. What is it? Boy? Shadow remained fixed on the wall or something beyond it, may I? Miller asked, gesturing to the architectural drawings stored nearby. Mrs. Abernathy hesitated only briefly before professional curiosity overcame her librarian's protective instincts. Of course. Miller carefully extracted several large folded plans. Some dated back to the library's construction in 1911. Others documented renovations in the 1950s and 1980s. Shadow never shifted his attention from the corner. Here we go, Miller murmured, finding a utilities overlay from 1956. The gas main runs about 12 feet outside this wall, connecting to the old lamppost system. Is that significant? Mrs. Abernathy asked. Could be. I'll call Walter Thompson. Shadow suddenly stood, moving to Miller's side, then back to the corner, repeating this movement with clear purpose. He wants us to follow, Miller realized, gathering the plans. They climbed the stairs, Shadow leading with unusual urgency. In the main reading room, the scheduled fire safety demonstration was about to begin. 24 elementary school children sat cross-legged on a reading rug, supervised by their teacher and several parent volunteers. I need to make a call, Miller told Mrs. Abernathy. Can you delay the demonstration for a few minutes? But Shadow wasn't heading for the exit. Instead, he circled the reading room, nose working, then moved to a decorative floor vent near the children. Miller felt a cold prickle of concern. Mrs. Abernathy, where does that vent connect to? The old heating system. It's not functional anymore, just architectural preservation. Miller approached the vent, kneeling to inhale near the ornate metalwork. The smell was subtle but unmistakable. We need to move these children, he said quietly. Now. But the demonstration. Now, please. Something in his tone brooked no argument. Mrs. Abernathy smoothly intervened, suggesting the demonstration would be better in the courtyard garden, where there was more space. As the children filed out, Miller pulled his phone from his pocket and called the station. Ramirez, I need the gas detection equipment at the library. Tell Thompson to meet me here. He paused, watching Shadow, who had returned to his side. And contact the gas company. We may have a situation developing. After ending the call, Miller found a crumpled maintenance request form that had fallen behind a filing cabinet. It was dated 3 years earlier, a routine inspection request for the gas infrastructure that fed the historic lampposts around town, including the one outside the library. The form was marked Deferred Budget Constraints. Miller folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket as evidence of what he increasingly suspected. Maple Ridge was sitting on a ticking time bomb, and only a dog nobody wanted had noticed. The midnight shift at Maple Ridge Fire Department was typically quiet. Lieutenant Ramirez logged equipment maintenance reports, while firefighters Chen and Keller played cards in the break room. The scanner murmured routine communications, a traffic stop on Highway 16, an alarm reset at the high school. Ramirez glanced up as Shadow padded into the common area, his nightly inspection apparently complete. Ordinarily, he would settle on his bed in Miller's office, but tonight he sat in the middle of the room, watching the dispatch radio with unusual intensity. "What's with the dog?" Chen asked, entering with a coffee mug. "Don't know," Ramirez replied. "He's been acting strange all evening." Miller had left Shadow at the station while attending a county emergency management meeting. The dog had seemed restless since his return from the library that afternoon. The radio crackled. "Dispatch to MRFD. We've got a report of a strange odor at 1422 Oakwood Lane. Resident complaining of headache, nausea. That's the third call this week, Chen observed. Ramirez frowned. Gas company checked the last two, found nothing. Probably people being paranoid after the library evacuation, Keller said, joining them. Word gets around. Still, 3 calls, Ramirez mused. Shadow stood suddenly, moving toward the equipment bay. Engine 1 responding, Ramirez told dispatch, making a decision, and notify gas and electric again. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a modest 2-story home. Mrs. Winters, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s, met them on the porch in a bathrobe. I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, she said. The smell seems to have dissipated, but I've had this headache since yesterday. Ramirez had brought the department's only gas detector, an outdated handheld unit Miller had been trying to replace. For years, Shadow had jumped into the engine uninvited, and rather than waste time removing him, Ramirez had allowed him to come along. Standard procedure, Mrs. Winters, Ramirez assured her. Better safe than sorry. Inside, the detector registered normal readings. Shadow, however, moved with purpose through the house, spending significant time in the basement before returning to Ramirez's side with the same intent focus Miller had described from the library. All readings normal, Chen reported. Maybe it's carbon monoxide, Mrs. Winters suggested. We checked that too. Nothing irregular, Ramirez said, watching Shadow's unusual alertness. But I'd like to have the gas company conduct a more thorough inspection tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Shadow refused to enter the engine. Instead, he stood in the street, looking east toward downtown. What's his problem? Chen asked. Miller said he acted like this at the library, Ramirez replied, remembering their earlier conversation, right before they found the leak. The radio interrupted her thoughts. Dispatch to all units. Medical emergency at 517 Maple Avenue. Elderly. Young couple unconscious, possible carbon monoxide. That's only 3 blocks from here, Ramirez realized. Engine 1 responding. Shadow was already moving in that direction. At the Patel's residence, paramedics were loading 2 stretchers into an ambulance. The couple's adult son stood nearby, visibly shaken. Found them when I stopped by after my shift, he explained. Dad wasn't answering his phone. CO detector? Ramirez asked. Working fine. No alarms. Inside, Ramirez's detector again showed normal readings, but Shadow's behavior was even more pronounced. He moved between rooms with increasing agitation, returning repeatedly to Ramirez, then moving toward the door as if trying to lead her somewhere. Lieutenant, Chen called from the basement, their water heater's natural gas. And I found something strange. Chen pointed to a hairline crack in the foundation wall near the utility connections. There's a faint smell here, but the detector shows nothing. Shadow appeared beside them, focused intently on the crack. Back at the station at 3 a.m., Ramirez spread a town map across the table. She marked the locations of all reported odors and incidents over the past week. The library, Mrs. Winters' house, the Patel's residence, and 2 previous calls. What do you see? She asked Chen and Keller. They follow Main Street, Chen observed. Almost like the main gas line, Ramirez finished, tracing the route with her finger, and all incidents happening after business hours or early morning when buildings are closed up. Shadow sat beside the map, watching their realization dawn. We need to wake up Miller and Thompson, Ramirez decided. This isn't paranoia or coincidence. As Keller reached for the phone, the scanner announced another call, the bakery owner. Opening early, had found his assistant unconscious near the ovens. Shadow was already at the door. Let me make sure I understand what you're proposing, Mayor Patterson said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. You want to evacuate the historic district based on a dog's behavior and a few unrelated incidents? The emergency meeting had been hastily convened in the town hall conference room at 7 a.m. Miller stood at the head of the table, dark circles under his eyes, betraying his sleepless night. Shadow sat motionless beside him. Around the table, department heads and council. Members exchanged skeptical glances. The incidents aren't unrelated, Miller insisted, pointing to the map Ramirez had prepared. They all align with the main gas infrastructure, and they're increasing in frequency and severity. But your own detection equipment shows normal readings. Patterson countered. Miller glanced at Thompson, who cleared his throat. Our handheld detectors are basic models, the engineer explained. They're designed for concentrated gas detection. If we're dealing with microscopic leaks across a distributed area— Microscopic leaks, Councilwoman Diaz repeated flatly. So not actually dangerous? Individual leaks might register below detection thresholds, Thompson clarified. But collectively, especially in enclosed spaces overnight— This sounds like speculation, Patterson interrupted. Chief Miller, I appreciate your concern, but we need hard evidence before disrupting downtown businesses during peak tourist season. Miller's jaw tightened. The Patels are in intensive care. The bakery assistant is hospitalized. These aren't coincidences. Carbon monoxide poisoning happens every year, Public Health Director Wright interjected, especially in older homes with aging appliances. At multiple locations simultaneously, Ramirez challenged from her position near the door. All coincidentally along the gas main? I've contacted the county hazmat unit, Miller continued. They can bring advanced detection equipment. At what cost? Patterson demanded. We're already over budget for emergency services this quarter. The cost of doing nothing could be significantly higher, Miller replied evenly. Shadow stood. Suddenly, moving to the large windows overlooking the town square, his attention fixed on something outside, body rigid with focus. Your dog seems restless, Patterson observed dismissively. Perhaps he needs a walk. Miller joined Shadow at the window. The morning farmers' market was setting up, vendors arranging produce and crafts on folding tables. Early shoppers milled about, coffee cups in hand. A perfect small-town scene. He's not restless, Miller said quietly. He's alerting. To what? Exactly. Patterson's patience was clearly wearing thin. County hazmat can be here in 3 hours, Thompson offered, checking his phone. If we could just postpone the market— Absolutely not, Patterson declared. We're not disrupting town activities based on a dog's— whatever this is. He gestured vaguely toward Shadow. Miller unclipped a half-completed incident report from his folder, sliding it across the table. I've documented every instance of Shadow's behavior corresponding to subsequent gas detection. His accuracy rate is remarkable. Patterson barely glanced at the form. With all due respect to your pet project, Chief Miller, we need scientific data, not canine intuition. The door opened and a technician from the gas company entered. Sorry I'm late. Initial surveys show no significant leaks in the main lines. We've checked all the reported locations and found only trace readings within normal parameters. Patterson spread his hands in a there-you-have-it gesture. Miller felt his credibility eroding by the second. The equipment you're using isn't sensitive enough. Chief, Patterson cut him off, unless you can provide concrete evidence of immediate danger, this meeting is concluded. Shadow had returned to Miller's side, his demeanor communicating urgency only his handler could read. 24 hours, Miller requested, a last attempt. Give me 24 hours with the county equipment before dismissing this entirely. Patterson sighed. Fine, 1 day, but no evacuations, no public statements that might cause panic, and if nothing shows up on the county equipment, we consider this matter closed. As the meeting dispersed, Ramirez approached Miller. They're not listening. No, Miller agreed, watching Shadow's continued alertness. They're not. What now? Miller knelt beside Shadow, studying the dog's intense focus. In the weeks since adopting him, Miller had learned to trust this silent communication. Shadow wasn't reactive like other dogs. He was deliberate, methodical, watching and waiting until action was absolutely necessary. We document everything, Miller decided, and we prepare for what Shadow already knows is coming. Which is? Miller met her gaze steadily. Something that will make everyone wish they'd listened to the dog nobody wanted. The meteorological report pinned to the station bulletin board might as well have been a countdown to disaster. Miller studied the barometric pressure charts with growing concern as Thompson explained their significance. "It's called a temperature inversion," the engineer said, pointing to the atmospheric data. "Cold air gets trapped under a layer of warm air, creating a cap that prevents normal dispersion of gases. Combined with the high-pressure system moving," Miller began. "Exactly. Any gas leaking from underground will stay concentrated at ground level instead of dissipating. It's worst in the early morning when the air is coolest." Ramirez joined them, coffee in hand. "That explains why incidents are happening at dawn. Gas accumulating overnight." Miller checked his watch. County Hazmat was still 2 hours out. Shadow sat nearby, watching them with that same intense focus that hadn't diminished since yesterday. "I'm going to make another sweep," Miller decided. "See if the handheld detectors pick up anything new with these changing conditions." "I'll come with you," Thompson offered. "2 sets of eyes." "3, Ramirez corrected, setting down her mug, "and 1 nose." She nodded toward Shadow. Outside, the morning air felt unusually still, heavy with humidity from the approaching weather system. They took Engine 1, driving slowly through the historic district where businesses were opening for the day. Shadow stood between the front seats, attention shifting from one side of the street to the other. "Stop here," Miller instructed as they approached the library. Mrs. Abernathy was unlocking the front doors. "Chief Miller, I was just about to call you. The smell is much stronger this morning." Inside, their handheld detector finally registered a reading, still within acceptable parameters, but definitely present. "Progress," Thompson muttered, recording the numbers. They continued their patrol, stopping at each location where incidents had been reported. At every site, the readings were slightly elevated from yesterday. "It's happening just as you predicted," Miller told Thompson as they exited the bakery, where the owner reported persistent headaches despite having all windows open. "The pressure system is acting like a lid on a pot," Thompson confirmed grimly. "And underground, the gas lines are feeling the increased stress." At the town square, they found Martinez, the gas company technician, taking readings near a manhole cover. "Finding anything?" Miller asked, already knowing the answer from Martinez's frustrated expression. "Trace amounts, but nothing that explains the symptoms people are reporting," Martinez admitted. "It doesn't make sense. With this many complaints, we should be seeing higher concentrations." Shadow circled the technician, then moved deliberately to the decorative grate he'd shown interest in days earlier. This time, he pawed at it insistently. "He's been doing that all morning," Martinez noted. "What's his deal?" "He's trying to tell us something," Miller said, kneeling beside the grate. "Can we get this open?" Martinez hesitated. "It's not a standard access point, humor me." With Thompson's help, they removed the decorative ironwork. The shaft descended about 12 feet before connecting to a horizontal tunnel, part of the original infrastructure from when the square had been constructed. Miller lowered the detector into the opening. Immediately, it began to beep rapidly, the display jumping well into the warning zone. "There's our problem," Miller said, showing the readings to Martinez. "The gas is pooling in the old tunnel system before seeping up through various exit points." Martinez stared at the numbers. Then, at Shadow. "How did he know?" "He's been trying to tell us for days," Miller replied. The radio on Miller's belt crackled. "Chief, this is dispatch. We've got calls coming in from the diner, multiple people reporting dizziness and nausea." "On our way," Miller responded. To Thompson and Martinez, he added, "It's getting worse faster than we anticipated. We need to start evacuations." "The mayor won't authorize it without county confirmation," Thompson reminded him. Miller watched as Shadow paced restlessly around. The open grate, his behavior more agitated than ever before. "Then we'd better hope County Hazmat drives faster than scheduled," Miller said, "because Shadow's telling us we're running out of time." As they hurried back to the engine, a woman stumbled out of the bookstore across the square. supporting herself against the doorframe. "Something's wrong," she called weakly. "Everyone inside has a headache." Shadow suddenly did something none of them had ever witnessed before. He barked, a single, sharp sound that cut through the morning air like a warning bell. Every head turned toward the silent dog who had finally found his voice, precisely when it mattered most. "That's it," Miller decided. "Protocol be damned. Ramirez, call dispatch. We're evacuating the square, now." Chaos erupted in the town square as firefighters began clearing businesses. Mayor Patterson arrived, face flushed with anger. "Miller, what do you think you're doing?" Miller handed him the detector, its display still showing alarming numbers from the tunnel measurement. "Preventing a disaster. We have confirmed gas readings well above safety thresholds." Patterson studied the device, his expression shifting from outrage to concern. How widespread? Unknown without better equipment, but Shadow's behavior suggests it's throughout the historic district. As if on cue, Shadow barked again, the second time in his life. The sound drew everyone's attention. "What's gotten into him?" Patterson asked. "He's been trying to warn us for days," Miller explained. "Now he's making sure we listen." The county. Hazmat truck arrived, technicians in yellow gear deploying with professional efficiency. Their sophisticated equipment confirmed Miller's fears within minutes. "You've got methane concentrations approaching explosive levels in multiple locations," the hazmat captain reported. "And it's not just the tunnels. We're finding hairline fractures in the foundations of several buildings, including the library and town hall." Thompson knelt beside an exposed section of pavement where hazmat had removed a core sample. He photographed the cracked concrete with his phone, focusing on the microscopic fissures barely visible to the naked eye. "The infrastructure is failing systematically," he explained to Miller and Patterson. "Years of stress, seasonal expansion and contraction, and deferred maintenance have created a network of tiny fractures. The gas is following these paths of least resistance." Shadow moved with increasing urgency between the growing crowd of evacuees and the building still being cleared. His earlier hesitation had transformed into determined action, leading rescue personnel to areas they hadn't yet checked. "We need to expand the evacuation zone," Miller told Patterson. "At minimum, the entire historic district." Patterson no longer argued. "Do it. I'll coordinate with emergency management for shelter locations." As they mobilized, a reporter from the local news station approached. "Chief Miller, is it true you discovered this leak because of a dog?" Before Miller could answer, Ramirez stepped in. "Shadow identified the danger days ago. If we'd listened sooner, we might have avoided this emergency evacuation." Inside the library, hazmat technicians had discovered alarming readings in the basement archive. Mrs. Abernathy supervised the hasty removal of irreplaceable historical documents. "The original town plans might help identify other vulnerable areas," she told Miller, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. "They show all the original gas lines, including ones later abandoned but never removed." "We need those, Thompson," said. Shadow appeared at the basement entrance, barking sharply. A third unprecedented vocalization. "What is it, boy?" Miller asked. The dog darted back up the stairs. Miller and Thompson followed to find hazmat technicians rushing people from the building. "Readings are spiking," one explained. "Something's changed." Outside, the atmospheric pressure continued to build as the weather system intensified. The dense air pressed down on the town like a lid on a simmering pot. "It's creating a pressure differential," Thompson realized, forcing more gas upward through the fractures. The first emergency alert sounded, a wailing siren that hadn't been used since tornado warnings 3 years earlier. People streamed from buildings, many confused, some frightened. Shadow led Miller to the diner, where the evacuation was proceeding. Slowly, due to the number of breakfast patrons, the dog's behavior changed suddenly. Instead of entering, he backed away from the door, ears flat against his head. "Everyone out! Now!" Miller shouted, recognizing Shadow's warning. The last customer had barely cleared the threshold when a muffled thump shook the building. Windows rattled but held. A small pocket of gas had ignited in the kitchen, where a pilot light had provided the spark. "It's starting," Thompson said, his voice tight with fear. "If the pockets are igniting individually, they could eventually chain react through the tunnel system," Miller finished. Patterson arrived. His earlier skepticism completely vanished. "County Emergency Management is activating the full disaster plan. What else do we need?" Miller watched Shadow, who had moved to the center of the square, attention fixed on the ground beneath his paws. The dog was completely still, except for his head, which tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. "We need to find the main shut-off valve," Miller decided. "Cut the source before these individual pockets connect." "And where exactly is this valve?" Patterson asked. Thompson looked grim. "That's the problem. According to current records, there are 6 different shut-offs installed during different eras. None are labeled as the master." "But the original plans," Mrs. Abernathy interjected, "might show the primary valve from the initial installation." As they spoke, Shadow barked a 4th time, then began moving with deliberate purpose toward Town Hall. The Maple Ridge High School gymnasium transformed into an emergency command center with remarkable speed. Folding tables formed a horseshoe around a large projection screen displaying a hastily created evacuation map. Red zones marked confirmed gas readings, yellow indicated potential risk areas, and green designated safe evacuation routes. Most striking about the map was its unusual basis. It perfectly matched the pattern of Shadow's behavior over the past 3 days. "We've completed evacuation of zones 1 through 4, Ramirez reported, using a laser pointer to indicate the historic district and surrounding blocks. "Zone 5 is at 70%, with priority given to the elderly and those reporting symptoms." Around the command table, representatives from county emergency services, state police, and neighboring fire departments absorbed the information. Miller stood at the head of the table, Shadow sitting attentively at his side. "The gas company has shut down supply to the affected areas," Martinez added, "but residual gas in the lines and tunnels remains problematic." "Estimated time to full dissipation?" asked the county emergency director. Thompson shook his head. "Unknown. With the current atmospheric conditions trapping gas at ground level and the network of fractures still releasing pockets from the soil, it could be days." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled officials. "We don't have days," Miller stated flatly. "Those individual ignitions we've seen will eventually connect. We need to find the main valve, controlling the original infrastructure, and ensure it's completely closed." "Which brings us to our most pressing issue," Patterson interjected, "the original infrastructure plans." Mrs. Abernathy spread the fragile documents on a separate table. "These date to 1902, with modifications noted through 1958. The primary gas distribution system was designed with a central fail-safe, a master valve that could shut down the entire grid." "So where is it?" demanded the county director. "According to these notes," Mrs. Abernathy said, adjusting her glasses, "beneath the original town hall steps." "That's now the inner courtyard," Thompson realized. "When they expanded the building in the 1970s, they built over the original entrance. That valve could be under 10 feet of concrete and steel." Shadow's ears perked up. He rose, moving to the map, focusing on the town hall location. "He's been trying to lead us there all morning," Miller observed. The double doors swung open as a hazmat technician entered, face grim. "We've got another ignition at the eastern edge of the square. Small, contained, but the gas concentrations are increasing despite shutdown." "Ground saturation," Thompson explained. "The gas has permeated the soil over time. Even with supply cut, it's still finding its way to the surface." The county director studied the map, then Shadow, then Miller. "Your dog has been tracking this from the beginning?" "Yes," Miller confirmed. His behavior pattern has consistently indicated gas presence before our equipment could detect it. Why didn't you evacuate sooner? The question hung in the air. Patterson had the grace to look uncomfortable. The evidence wasn't considered conclusive, Miller replied diplomatically. Well, it's conclusive now, the director stated. What's your recommendation, Chief Miller? Miller exchanged glances with Thompson before answering. We need to locate that master valve and ensure it's fully closed. Simultaneously, we need to establish ventilation in the tunnel system to disperse accumulated gas safely. With respect, a state police captain interjected. How do you plan to find a valve that's been buried for 50 years? All eyes shifted to Shadow, who had returned to Miller's side. The same way we found the problem in the first place, Miller said. Shadow has demonstrated an extraordinary ability to detect gas concentrations well below our equipment thresholds. If anyone can find the valve location, he can. You're suggesting we base our emergency response on a dog? The captain asked incredulously. Lieutenant Ramirez stepped forward. With all due respect, sir, this dog has been right about everything. So far, while our human assumptions have been consistently wrong, I trust his instincts over our equipment at this point. The room fell silent as this assessment sank in. Outside, sirens wailed as another small explosion rocked the distant town square. Time is running out, Miller pressed. I need a team with concrete cutting equipment at Town Hall immediately. Shadow will pinpoint the valve location. The county director made the call. Do it. Full resources authorized. As the team mobilized, a local reporter who had been permitted to document the emergency response approached Miller. Chief, is it true this whole situation was identified by your canine unit before any equipment detected the danger? Miller looked down at Shadow, who was already moving toward the door, ready for the next phase of the mission. Yes, Miller replied. Simply, the dog nobody wanted just became the dog everybody needs. The town hall stood eerily empty, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of the emergency team. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air, and possibly something more dangerous. Readings are elevated but not critical, reported the hazmat technician, sweeping his advanced detector across the main lobby, consistent with what we're seeing throughout the evacuation zone. Miller, Thompson, and a 4-person team from County Emergency Services followed Shadow as he moved with purpose through the building. The dog had been outfitted with a specialized harness, identifying him as an emergency service canine. His demeanor, now completely transformed from the hesitant shelter dog of just weeks earlier, according to the original blueprints, Thompson said, studying the water-damaged document Mrs. Abernathy had carefully preserved. The main entrance was oriented eastward, with steps leading up from what is now the inner courtyard. And the master valve would have been installed at the base of those steps, Miller added, accessible through a service panel for maintenance, which is now buried under the 1970s expansion, the county engineer finished. We're essentially looking for a room that no longer exists on any current plans. Shadow led them down a corridor toward the basement level, pausing at a nondescript maintenance door. He sat, looking expectantly at Miller. This isn't on the original plans, Thompson observed, comparing the modern layout to the aged blueprint. Storage closet, explained the facility manager who had joined their team. Been here since I started 15 years ago. Nothing special. The door opened to reveal shelves of cleaning supplies, paper products, and maintenance equipment. Shadow entered without hesitation, moving to the back wall, where he began pawing at the baseboard. There's nothing there, the manager said, just concrete foundation. Miller knelt beside Shadow, running his hand along the wall. Feels different here. Newer concrete, maybe? Thompson joined him, examining the seam where wall met floor. This section has been patched. See the color difference? Slightly darker than the surrounding area. The hazmat technician directed his detector toward the spot Shadow indicated. The reading jumped noticeably. He's right. There's definitely gas seepage here. The county engineer consulted the blueprint again. If I'm orienting this correctly, this closet would be directly above where the original entrance steps would have ended, and where the master valve access would have been, Thompson concluded. Shadow barked once, that same authoritative sound that had become his emergency alert. Get the concrete cutting equipment, Miller ordered, and everyone needs to mask. Up. If we're breaking into a sealed space with gas accumulation, we need to minimize spark risk. As the team donned safety gear, Miller fitted Shadow with a specialized K9 oxygen mask, a donation that had seemed excessive when it arrived at the station months earlier, now potentially life-saving. Good boy, Miller said quietly, adjusting the straps. You found it. The cutting began cautiously, with water continuously sprayed to reduce dust and spark potential. After removing approximately 2 square feet of concrete, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. A rusted metal hatch with a faded warning. Maple Ridge Gas Authority, authorized personnel only. This is it, Thompson confirmed. Excitement, breaking through his professional reserve. The access panel was sealed over rather than removed during renovation. The facility manager looked stunned. I've worked here for 15 years and never knew this existed. Carefully they pried open the hatch, revealing a narrow service tunnel descending about 6 feet to a small chamber. The hazmat reading spiked. Dangerously, full masks, ordered the county team leader, and no electrical equipment beyond this point. Miller looked at Shadow, who stared intently at the opening. You stay here, boy. Too dangerous below. For once, Shadow disobeyed, stepping closer to the hatch. Chief, Ramirez said over the radio, we've got reports of 2 more ignitions near the square. Fire suppression teams are containing them, but frequency is increasing. We're on it, Miller replied. To the team, he added, we need to move quickly. The descent into the forgotten chamber revealed a time capsule of early 20th century infrastructure. Cast iron pipes converged at a central point where a massive valve wheel, nearly 2 feet in diameter, protruded from the main line. Its surface was covered in decades of corrosion. Original installation date stamped here, Thompson noted, brushing away grime. 1902. This hasn't been touched in 70 years at least. Will closing it help if the system is already compromised? Asked the county engineer. It should reduce pressure throughout the original network, Thompson explained. Even with fractures, cutting off the main artery will significantly slow gas movement. 2 team members positioned themselves at the valve wheel, attempting to rotate. It counterclockwise. It didn't budge. Frozen solid, one grunted. We need penetrating oil and more leverage, the other added. Above them, Shadow barked twice in rapid succession. Something's changing, Miller realized, climbing back to check on the dog. He emerged to find Shadow in a state of high alert, attention fixed on the outer wall of the building. The hazmat technician's expression confirmed Miller's fear. Readings are climbing rapidly throughout the building, he reported. We've got major seepage occurring. The radio crackled. Chief, multiple ignition events now reported across downtown. Fire suppression is becoming challenging. We need that valve closed now. Time seemed to compress as the team worked frantically on the rusted valve. Penetrating oil sizzled on the ancient metal, while 2 technicians applied increasing force. With pipe extensions for leverage, the wheel groaned but still refused to turn. We need more pressure, the county engineer called out, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool underground air. Above ground, Miller monitored Shadow with growing concern. The dog's breathing had become labored, his normally alert posture slightly slouched. Even with the oxygen mask, hours of exposure to trace amounts of gas were taking their toll. Shadow needs a break, Miller told the hazmat technician. I'm going to get him outside the perimeter. But when Miller attempted to lead Shadow away, the dog resisted, pulling back toward the open hatch with surprising strength. He won't leave, Miller realized aloud. The radio crackled with Ramirez's voice. Chief, county emergency is reporting. A new development. Closing the main valve has created pressure buildups in isolated sections of the network. We've got dangerous concentrations forming in pockets throughout downtown. Thompson emerged from the access tunnel, face grim behind his mask. The main valve is moving, but too slowly. At this rate, it'll take hours to fully close. We don't have hours, Miller replied, showing him the latest hazmat readings. Shadow suddenly pulled away from Miller, moving toward the exit with new urgency. "What is it, boy?" Miller asked, following. The dog paused at the doorway, looking back as if ensuring Miller was coming, then continued through the empty corridors of Town Hall. His path was deliberate but different from before, not toward the exit, but to another section of the building. "He's tracking a different gas pocket," the hazmat technician realized, watching his readings fluctuate as they followed Shadow. Concentrations are shifting as the partial main valve closure redistributes pressure. Shadow led them to the records room, a windowless space filled with filing cabinets and document storage. He stopped at a floor vent, pawing insistently. "There must be a secondary valve nearby," Thompson theorized, consulting the blueprint again. When they expanded the municipal gas system in the 1930s, they installed isolation valves at junction points. The hazmat readings near the vent were alarmingly high. "We need to find that valve," Miller decided. "Shadow, where is it?" The dog moved to a cabinet against the wall, attempting to squeeze behind it. "Help me move this," Miller ordered. With the cabinet shifted, they discovered a small access panel painted over to match the wall. Inside was a secondary valve, smaller than the main one, but significant. This would control gas flow to the eastern district, Thompson confirmed. This valve turned more easily, having been accessed more recently than the main one. As it closed, the hazmat readings in the immediate area began to drop. "It's working," the technician confirmed, "but we're going to need to find all the secondary valves to isolate the system completely." Shadow was already moving again, heading for a different section of the building. Over the next hour, the pattern repeated. Shadow led them to 3 additional secondary valves hidden throughout Town Hall, each one controlling a different section of the historic district's gas network. With each valve closure, the hazmat readings declined in corresponding areas outside. But Shadow's condition was deteriorating. His movements had slowed, his breathing increasingly labored even with the oxygen mask. After the 4th valve, he stumbled slightly, catching himself with visible effort. "He needs medical attention," Miller insisted, kneeling beside the dog. "We've got the pattern now. We can find the remaining valves without him." The hazmat technician shook his head. "The readings are too complex, shifting constantly as each valve affects the system. Without him, we'd be searching blindly." Shadow pushed himself up, leaning briefly against Miller's leg before moving toward the exit, this time heading outside the building. "He's still tracking," Thompson realized. "There must be more valves beyond Town Hall." Outside, the evacuation zone was eerily quiet, punctuated by distant sirens and the occasional sound of emergency equipment. Shadow led them across the empty town square toward the old post office, his pace determined despite his obvious fatigue. "One more valve, then he rests," Miller decided firmly. "No matter what." Ramirez met them at the post office steps, her expression revealing her shock at Shadow's condition. "Chief, he looks—" "I know," Miller cut her off. "This is his last location, then he's done." The valve at the post office controlled gas flow to the Western District. As they closed it, the emergency radio reported a significant drop in readings. "Throughout downtown, we've got the system nearly contained," Thompson reported with cautious optimism. "Just one section still showing elevated readings, the north end near the factory district." Shadow stood shakily, clearly intending to continue. "No," Miller said firmly, removing the dog's oxygen mask to replace the depleted tank. "You've done enough." But in that brief moment without the mask, Shadow caught a scent that triggered his final surge of energy. He bolted toward the old manufacturing district, moving with desperate purpose. "Shadow," Miller called, racing after him. The dog disappeared into a narrow alley between abandoned factory buildings, squeezing through a gap in a chain-link fence that the humans had to climb. By the time Miller caught up, Shadow was pawing frantically at a rusted utility cover half hidden by decades of overgrowth. Final junction point, Thompson realized, studying the blueprint. The original factory service line, it's not even on the modern maps. As they uncovered the forgotten valve, Shadow finally collapsed, his mission complete, but his strength exhausted. Dawn broke over an exhausted Maple Ridge, pale light illuminating empty streets and the scattered emergency vehicles still monitoring the evacuation zone. At the edge of town, the small veterinary clinic had become an unexpected focal point, its parking lot filled with police cruisers, fire department vehicles, and the personal cars of off-duty first responders. Inside, Dr. Wilson worked with calm efficiency in the examination room, administering oxygen and intravenous fluids to Shadow, while Miller watched from a chair, pulled as close to the treatment table as permitted. Gas exposure affects dogs similarly to humans, Dr. Wilson explained, checking Shadow's vitals, but their smaller body mass means toxins hit them harder and faster. Will he recover? Miller asked, voice hoarse from a night of shouting orders. And breathing less than clean air, Dr. Wilson's expression was cautiously positive. His oxygen levels are improving, and he's young and otherwise healthy, but these next few hours are critical. Miller hadn't left Shadow's side since the dog's collapse. After finding that final valve, Miller had carried Shadow's limp form nearly half a mile to the waiting emergency vehicle, refusing offers of assistance despite his own exhaustion. The door opened as Ramirez entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Miller before taking the seat beside him. Latest report, she said quietly. All gas readings throughout town have dropped below detection thresholds. Thompson says we're in the clear, barring any new fractures. Miller nodded, his attention never leaving Shadow's still form. The Patels have been upgraded to stable. Ramirez continued. Everyone else treated for exposure has been released with clean bills of health. Another nod. And Mayor Patterson is looking for you, something about a press conference and official commendations. At this, Miller finally spoke. He can wait. Ramirez didn't argue. They sat in companionable silence, 2 firefighters maintaining their vigil just as they would for any fallen colleague. Outside the examination room, the waiting area had filled with unexpected visitors. Mrs. Abernathy sat primly on a plastic chair, a stack of library books beside her, literature on canine health she'd brought for reference. Thompson paced near the window, periodically checking his phone for updates from the recovery teams. Even Martinez from the gas company had stopped by, bringing a box of donuts and awkward but sincere gratitude. Most surprising was the steady stream of townspeople arriving with tokens for Shadow, homemade dog treats, toys, even hand-drawn cards from children. The clinic receptionist created a display table that quickly overflowed. By mid-morning, news vans had arrived from the regional stations. The Maple Ridge Gazette's editor had already drafted the front page with the headline, "Silent Hero." The canine nobody wanted saves Maple Ridge, alongside a photo of Shadow taken during a training demonstration weeks earlier. Inside the examination room, Shadow stirred for the first time in hours. His eyes opened briefly, finding Miller before closing again. That's a good sign, Dr. Wilson said, checking the monitors. His body is starting to come out of protective shutdown. Miller reached out tentatively, resting his hand on Shadow's flank. The slight rise and fall of breathing beneath his palm felt like the most important motion in the world. "You did good, boy," he whispered, "real good." By afternoon, Shadow had stabilized enough for Dr. Wilson to express genuine optimism. "He's responding well to treatment. Barring complications, he should make a full recovery." The news spread quickly through the impromptu gathering outside. Mayor Patterson, who had arrived an hour earlier, seized the opportunity to address the assembled crowd and news cameras. Today, we celebrate not just the avoidance of catastrophe, but the extraordinary partnership between our fire department and a very special canine officer, he announced, seamlessly adjusting to the role of proud civic leader rather than the skeptic, who had dismissed Miller's concerns. Shadow's remarkable abilities saved countless lives and prevented incalculable damage to our historic downtown. Inside, oblivious to the speeches and cameras, Shadow opened his eyes again. This time they remained open, focusing first on Miller, then shifting to Ramirez, who had dozed off in her chair. "Hey there," Miller said softly. "Welcome back." Shadow's tail moved slightly, just a weak thump against the examination table, but enough to bring a smile to Miller's exhausted face. "The doctor says you're going to be fine," Miller continued, gently stroking Shadow's head, "and half the town is outside waiting to thank you." At this, Shadow's ears perked up slightly. "That's right. Turns out everyone wants the silent canine now." Shadow's response was characteristically understated. A slight shift closer to Miller's hand, a deep exhale that seemed to carry the last tension from his body, and a look of quiet contentment that said more than barking ever could. Recovery came gradually for Shadow. Dr. Wilson insisted on a full week of observation at the clinic, monitoring his oxygen levels and neurological responses. The small treatment room transformed into something between a hospital ward and a celebrity's reception area, its walls papered with children's drawings of a heroic German shepherd saving their town. Miller slept on a cot beside Shadow for the first 3 nights, returning to his own bed only after Dr. Wilson pointedly mentioned that the fire chief also needed rest to recover from his own gas exposure. Even then, Miller arrived each morning before his shift and returned each evening, often with department paperwork that he completed while sitting beside Shadow's recovery bed. "His progress is remarkable," Dr. Wilson noted on the 5th day, reviewing the medical chart that had become crowded with observations and well-wishes from the clinic staff. "Canines typically bounce back faster than humans, but he's exceeding even my optimistic projections." Shadow was sitting up now, alert and watching the clinic's activities with his characteristic focused attention. His appetite had returned, though he ate with a deliberate care that the vet techs found endearing. "When can he come home?" Miller asked. "I'd like to keep him through the weekend," Dr. Wilson replied. "His blood work is still showing traces of toxins that need to clear, but you could take him for a short walk outside today if you'd like." The suggestion brightened Miller's tired face. "Hear that, boy? A little fresh air?" Shadow's ears perked. Forward at the familiar word, walk, his tail sweeping slowly across the bedding. Outside, the October afternoon was crisp and clear, the air notably fresher than the lingering chemical smells of the clinic. Shadow moved carefully, staying close to Miller's side as they circled the small grassy area behind the building. "Chief Miller!" A woman approached from the parking lot, a young boy beside her clutching a paper bag. Miller recognized them as the family from the bookstore who had shown symptoms just before Shadow's first bark. "Tommy wanted to thank Shadow personally," the woman explained. "He's been talking about nothing else all week." The boy, about 7 years old, approached cautiously. "Is it okay if I pet him?" Tommy reached out with the careful solemnity of a child who understands the gravity of illness. Shadow lowered his head slightly, allowing the small hand to stroke his fur. "I made you something," Tommy said, opening the paper bag to reveal a handmade get-well card and a braided rope toy. "Mom says you have to wait until the doctor says you can play, though." Shadow accepted the gift with a dignified patience that made Miller smile. The dog, who had once been deemed untrainable, now interacted with people as if he'd been doing it all his life. This pattern repeated throughout Shadow's recovery. The steady stream of visitors brought comfort items for both Shadow and Miller. Home-cooked meals, specially baked dog treats, books to pass the time. Lieutenant Ramirez organized a rotation of department members to cover Miller's administrative duties, allowing him to focus on Shadow's recovery without worrying about work piling up. Never seen anything like it, Ramirez commented during one visit, surveying the collection of gifts that had expanded to fill a storage closet. Half the town acting like they've known this dog their whole lives. He saved their homes, their businesses, Miller replied. People don't forget something like that. It's more than that, Ramirez observed, watching Shadow methodically arrange his blanket before settling down. He gives people hope. If something everyone rejected turned out to be so valuable— She didn't finish the thought, but Miller understood. In a small town that had faced economic decline and infrastructure neglect, Shadow's story resonated deeply. On the clinic wall, Shadow's recovery chart had become an impromptu community bulletin board. Alongside the medical notations tracking his improving vital signs were messages from townspeople. Updates on repairs, notes about returning evacuees, even announcements of fundraisers being organized to help those whose businesses had suffered. During the evacuation, your dog has become the town's emotional barometer, Dr. Wilson noted wryly. People seem to believe that as Shadow recovers, so does Maple Ridge. The most significant visit came on the 6th day, when engineer Thompson arrived with rolled blueprints under his arm. The town council unanimously approved the comprehensive infrastructure inspection program, he announced, spreading the plans across Shadow's bed. Every inch of the gas system will be examined and upgraded where needed. No more deferring maintenance. Shadow studied the blueprints with the same intensity he'd shown when tracking gas leaks, his head tilted slightly as if understanding their significance. "We're calling it the Shadow Protocol," Thompson added, with unexpected emotion in his voice, "because sometimes what we need most is someone who notices what everyone else has overlooked." On the 7th day, Dr. Wilson signed the release forms. "He's ready to go home," she declared, "though home has gotten considerably more complicated from what I hear. Indeed, Shadow's return to the firehouse had evolved into something approaching a civic celebration. Fire trucks were polished, the station decorated with welcome banners, and a new, proper dog bed, vastly more comfortable than the repurposed locker pad, waited in Miller's office. 3 weeks after the evacuation, Maple Ridge's town square hosted a ceremony unlike any in its 136-year history. The weather cooperated beautifully, offering clear skies and gentle autumn sunshine that illuminated the freshly repaired cobblestones where bronze paw prints had been embedded to mark Shadow's path during the crisis. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage draped with red, white, and blue bunting. Every seat was filled, with hundreds more townspeople standing around the perimeter. Regional news crews positioned cameras at strategic angles, while a representative from a national morning show conducted interviews with local officials. "Never expected this kind of attention," Thompson confided to Miller as they waited behind the stage. "We've had 3 different production companies call about movie rights." Miller adjusted his dress uniform, uncomfortable with the formality but accepting its necessity for the occasion. Shadow doesn't care about movies. He just wants to get back to work. As if understanding, Shadow sat perfectly composed beside Miller, wearing a new service vest emblazoned with the Maple Ridge Fire Department insignia. His recovery had progressed remarkably well, though Dr. Wilson still restricted him to light duty for another 2 weeks. "Chief Miller?" A woman approached, extending her hand. "Melissa Chen, National Canine Training Institute. I was hoping for a word." Miller recognized the name, one of the country's premier service dog training facilities, and coincidentally, the very organization that had rejected Shadow as untrainable years earlier. "We've been following Shadow's story with great interest," Chen continued, not recognizing the irony. "His ability to detect gas leaks at concentrations below mechanical thresholds is extraordinary. We'd like to discuss bringing him to our facility for study and potentially developing a specialized training protocol based on his methods." Before Miller could respond, Mayor Patterson called everyone to positions for the ceremony's commencement. The event unfolded with the carefully choreographed dignity typical of small-town formal occasions. The high school band played patriotic selections, local officials delivered brief speeches, and representatives from county emergency services presented commendations to the fire department personnel who had managed the crisis. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Mayor Patterson approached the microphone, his voice carrying across the hushed square. Today, we honor an extraordinary member of our community, one who reminds us that sometimes the greatest heroes come in unexpected forms. He gestured toward Miller and Shadow. Would Fire Chief Robert Miller and Shadow please join me on stage? As they climbed the steps, spontaneous applause erupted, continuing for nearly a full minute. Shadow maintained his characteristic composure, though his tail swayed slightly at the positive attention. Maple Ridge has always taken pride in our history, Patterson continued once the applause subsided. Today, we add a new chapter to that history, one of courage, perseverance, and the remarkable bond between humans and their canine companions. The mayor turned to address Shadow directly, a gesture that might have seemed theatrical, if not for the genuine emotion in his voice. Shadow, you were overlooked and underestimated, yet you performed your duty with unwavering dedication. You exemplify the very best qualities we aspire to in our public servants. From a velvet box, Patterson removed a custom-made medallion, crafted by the town jeweler from reclaimed bronze found during the infrastructure repairs. The medal, attached to a new collar, bore the inscription, "For extraordinary service and courage, Shadow, Maple Ridge's silent guardian." With the authority vested in me as mayor of Maple Ridge, I present this Medal of Valor, the first ever awarded to a canine officer in our town's history. Miller accepted the medal, carefully attaching it to Shadow's collar while cameras flashed. And the crowd applauded once more. When given his turn at the microphone, Miller's remarks were characteristically brief. Shadow reminds us that worth isn't measured by traditional standards. Sometimes the qualities that make someone different are exactly what make them invaluable. The ceremony concluded with the announcement that had generated the most excitement. Throughout town, the establishment of the Shadow Canine Training Center to be built on donated land at the edge of Maple Ridge. The facility would specialize in identifying and developing dogs with unique aptitudes that might be overlooked in traditional training programs. We've secured initial funding through state and federal grants, Patterson announced proudly. Construction begins next spring. As the formal proceedings ended, Shadow found himself surrounded by admirers of all ages. Children approached cautiously, asking permission to pet him. Former skeptics, including council members who had questioned Miller's pet project, offered sheepish congratulations. Among the crowd, Miller noticed a familiar face. Davis, the young trainer who had been Shadow's last advocate at the original training facility. He approached with a bittersweet smile. "I always knew he was special," Davis said, kneeling to greet Shadow. "Just didn't know how to prove it to everyone else." Shadow recognized his former ally immediately, pressing his head briefly against Davis's hand in a rare display of affection. "He never forgot you," Miller observed. "And I never forgot him," Davis replied. "That's actually why I'm here. I've been offered a position with the new training center. Thought maybe Shadow could use someone who understood him from the beginning." As they spoke, Melissa Chen approached again, this time with a formal proposal folder emblazoned with the National Canine Training Institute logo. "Chief Miller, about our discussion regarding Shadow's specialized training potential." Miller held up a hand, cutting her off politely but firmly. "Shadow stays in Maple Ridge. If your organization wants to study his methods, you're welcome to send representatives to our new training center once it's operational." Chen's surprise was evident. "But the opportunities for Shadow at our facility are no greater than the opportunities here," Miller finished. "Shadow found his purpose in Maple Ridge, and Maple Ridge found something valuable in Shadow. That partnership doesn't need improvement." Shadow, seeming to understand the exchange, pressed, slightly closer to Miller's side, not from insecurity, but from choice. The dog, who had once been passed over by every handler, had found his perfect match, and no medal or national recognition could improve upon that simple truth. 6 months transformed the vacant lot at the edge of Maple Ridge into the Shadow Canine Training Center, a modern facility with indoor and outdoor training areas, specialized scent detection rooms, and a small administrative building. What had begun as a modest local project expanded through grants, donations, and partnerships with regional emergency services who recognized the value in Shadow's unique abilities. The training manual that emerged from studying Shadow's methods challenged conventional wisdom. Traditional canine programs emphasized vocal alerts, barking to indicate detection. Shadow's approach was fundamentally different. Silent indication through body language, sustained attention, and deliberate movement patterns. "We're essentially rewriting the handbook," Miller explained to a group of visiting handlers from neighboring counties. "Shadow doesn't just detect differently, he communicates differently." At 61, retirement loomed just months away for Miller. The prospect had once filled him with uncertainty. Now it offered a transition to a new role as civilian consultant for the training program he had inspired. "The key is patience," Miller continued, watching Shadow demonstrate scent detection with remarkable precision. "Most programs wash out dogs who don't respond quickly or vocally enough, but some of the best detection work happens slowly, methodically." Shadow had fully recovered from his gas exposure, his coat regaining its luster and his energy returning to normal levels. If anything, the experience had enhanced his abilities, making him even more sensitive to trace chemical signatures. More surprising was Shadow's unexpected talent for teaching. He worked with handler candidates with the same patient focus he brought to detection work, somehow communicating proper technique through example rather than instruction. "He's showing them, not telling them," Lieutenant Ramirez observed during one training session. Just like he did with us during the crisis, Ramirez had undergone a remarkable transformation herself. Once Shadow's most vocal skeptic, she had become his staunchest advocate. She spent increasing time at the training center between shifts, watching Shadow work with quiet appreciation. "Have you thought about his future?" she asked Miller one afternoon, as they observed Shadow guiding a trainee through a complex detection scenario. "What do you mean?" "After you retire, Shadow's still young. He has years of service ahead of him." The question touched on Miller's greatest concern. Shadow had become more than a working dog or even a pet. He was a partner, a companion who had fundamentally changed Miller's approach to retirement. "I've been considering options," Miller admitted. "He could retire with me, of course. We've got the bond, but it would be a waste of his abilities." "He could stay with the department," Ramirez suggested, "under a new handler." Miller nodded slowly. "That's the logical solution. But finding the right match won't be easy. Shadow's particular, Ramirez repeated with a slight smile. "That's one word for it." The selection process began informally. Miller observed Shadow's interactions with various department members, looking for signs of the same connection they had formed. Several firefighters expressed interest in becoming Shadow's new handler, submitting formal applications complete with training plans and housing arrangements. Shadow, characteristically, showed no clear preference during these trial sessions. He worked cooperatively with each candidate, performing detection exercises with professional focus but offering no special acknowledgement or attachment. "It's like he's interviewing them," Davis commented during one evaluation. Now employed full-time. At the training center, the young trainer had become an expert in interpreting Shadow's subtle communication. "And none of them are passing," Miller agreed, unable to hide his concern. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a night training exercise. The scenario simulated a gas leak in a complex environment, the old factory building repurposed as a training ground. Ramirez, participating as an observer rather than a candidate, stood at the perimeter monitoring the exercise. Shadow had been working with Officer Jensen from the County Sheriff's Department, a promising handler with extensive canine experience. Halfway through the scenario, Shadow suddenly abandoned the exercise pattern, trotting directly to Ramirez. "He's breaking protocol," Jensen noted with disappointment. "I thought we were making progress." But Miller recognized something significant. In Shadow's behavior, the dog wasn't distracted or disengaged. He was making a choice. "Lieutenant," Miller called to Ramirez, "would you mind running through the next section of the exercise?" "Me?" Ramirez looked surprised. "I'm not a handler." "Candidate, humor me." Reluctantly, Ramirez entered the training area. Shadow immediately returned to the detection pattern, but with a subtle difference. His movements became more fluid, his indications clearer. He anticipated Ramirez's commands before she gave them, creating a seamless partnership that left the observing handlers murmuring with appreciation. "Well, I'll be damned," Davis whispered to Miller. "He's chosen her." "Apparently so," Miller agreed, feeling an unexpected blend of emotions, slight sadness at the prospect of transition, but predominant satisfaction at seeing the perfect match emerge naturally. After the exercise, Ramirez approached Miller, her expression conflicted. "I wasn't applying for this." "I know," Miller replied. "That might be exactly why Shadow selected you." "I've never been a canine handler." "Neither had I," Miller reminded her. "Sometimes the handler doesn't choose the dog. Sometimes the dog chooses the handler who sees them for what they truly are." Ramirez looked down at Shadow, who had positioned himself precisely between her and Miller, not choosing one over the other, but creating a connection between them. "Would you consider it?" Miller asked. "Officially?" Ramirez studied Shadow for a long moment. "I'd need training." "You've already started," Miller said simply. "Look at him. He's been training you all along." The retirement ceremony for Fire Chief Robert Miller unfolded beneath the shade of maple trees on the training center grounds. Simple wooden chairs arranged in neat rows held a gathering more intimate than Shadow's public commendation. Just department members, close colleagues, and family friends who had watched Miller serve Maple Ridge for nearly 4 decades. Shadow sat at attention beside the podium, wearing his service vest with the Medal of Valor attached. Beside him, Lieutenant, now Captain, Ramirez stood in dress uniform, her recent promotion a natural evolution after proving herself not only as Shadow's new handler, but as a decisive leader during the crisis. 38 years serving this community, Mayor Patterson reflected in his opening remarks. Chief Miller has been more than a fire department leader. He's been the steady hand guiding Maple Ridge through everything from budget crises to natural disasters to, most recently, an infrastructure emergency that could have destroyed our historic downtown. Miller listened with the slightly uncomfortable expression of someone who preferred action to accolades. His gaze kept drifting to Shadow, who maintained perfect composure despite the speeches and applause. When Miller finally took the podium, his remarks were characteristically brief. A fire department isn't about one person. It's about a team responding to community needs, adapting to challenges, and sometimes finding solutions in unexpected places. He glanced down at Shadow. Sometimes the most valuable team members are the ones nobody wanted until someone took a chance. After the formal presentations, a plaque, a shadow box containing his badges and insignia, the traditional fire helmet, Miller made his way through well-wishers to where Shadow and Ramirez waited. "So this is it," Ramirez said, emotion making her voice slightly rough. "End of an era, beginning of a new one," Miller corrected, kneeling to ruffle Shadow's ears. "You two are ready." Shadow leaned briefly against Miller's knee, a subtle gesture of affection that spoke volumes from a dog once deemed too detached for service. The adoption certificate had been framed and hung prominently in the training center's main hallway, Shadow's original shelter paperwork with its multiple transfer stamps, and unsuitable for service markings, now a testament to how profoundly wrong evaluations could be. Beside it hung the department photo taken just last week, showing Shadow surrounded by his team, Medal of Valor gleaming against his dark fur. As the gathering dispersed, Davis approached with 3 new arrivals, dogs from regional shelters that had been deemed difficult or untrainable by conventional standards. "Our newest class," Davis explained with quiet pride. "This one's been returned 4 times for being too nervous." He indicated a lanky shepherd mix. "This one's too independent," a stocky retriever. "And this one doesn't play right with others," a serious-looking border collie. Miller studied the 3 dogs, recognizing in each the wary alertness he'd first seen in Shadow. Not deficiency, but difference. "They're perfect," he decided. "Shadow will know exactly what to do with them." As if understanding, Shadow approached the new arrivals, not with the boisterous greeting of typical dogs, but with the measured assessment of a teacher evaluating potential. The nervous shepherd relaxed visibly under Shadow's calm presence, while the independent retriever watched him with growing interest. "He sees himself in them," Ramirez observed. "He sees potential," Miller corrected, "just like someone once saw in him." The new arrangement had evolved naturally. Shadow spent his working days at the training center and department with Ramirez, but his evenings and weekends at Miller's home. Not fully retired, not fully separated, a perfect balance that honored both relationships. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Miller, Ramirez, and Shadow took a final walk around the training grounds together. The facility had already gained national recognition, with departments across the country sending candidates to learn Shadow's methods. "I never expected any of this," Miller admitted, watching Shadow move slightly ahead of them on the path. "When I adopted him, I just wanted a standard fire safety dog." "Nothing standard about Shadow," Ramirez replied with a smile. "No," Miller agreed, "and thank goodness for that." At the crest of the small hill overlooking the training yard, they paused. Below, Davis worked with the 3 new dogs, demonstrating basic commands with the patient persistence that had become the center's trademark approach. "You know," Ramirez said thoughtfully, "we're up to 17 successful placements of untrainable dogs in service positions. 17 lives that would have been wasted," Miller nodded, "all because one dog showed us what we were missing." Shadow sat between them, alert and watchful as always, his attention fixed on the training session below. The border collie had separated from the group, moving to the perimeter with the same focused intensity Shadow often displayed. Davis, noticing this, didn't correct the dog, but instead followed, allowing the behavior to develop naturally. "He's found another one," Miller observed. "Another what?" Ramirez asked. "Another Shadow, a dog whose difference is their strength." As they watched, the border collie led Davis to a specific section of fencing, focusing intently on something neither human could perceive. Davis knelt beside the dog, examining the area with newfound respect. "The legacy continues," Ramirez said softly. Miller nodded, a sense of completion washing over him. The dog nobody wanted had not only saved a town, but had changed the very definition of what made a working dog valuable. Shadow's approach had become a methodology, his silence transformed from perceived defect to recognized strength. "Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms," Miller reflected, echoing the mayor's words from months earlier. "You just have to be quiet enough to notice them." Shadow turned at the sound of Miller's voice, his intelligent eyes meeting his first handler's gaze with that same profound connection that had begun in a shelter on a seemingly ordinary day. In that silent exchange lay everything that needed to be said: gratitude, respect, and the mutual recognition of 2 beings who had seen value in each other when no one else had bothered to look.